Good afternoon, everyone. I see that there are people in the room. If you could, before we get started, just put in the chat if you can hear me and that you are able to see all of our handouts for today. I will get started here in just a second, but I do want to make sure that everyone can hear me and has access to our materials. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. As I said just a second ago, good afternoon. My name is Shannon Bell. I am the test security specialist here at OSSE, and I will be taking everyone through the non-public test security training today. As you'll see in the chat box, I have also included this link here. All of the training materials and resources that I will reference today can be found at our bit.ly Google folder. As I mentioned, it's also in the chat box, and in the handout section, you'll also see 5 of the documents that I will talk about today, and you should be able to access all of those. Our agenda for today, for those who have attended this training in previous years, we have changed the structure a bit. We'll start out by talking about test integrity and test security. We'll go through assessments and timelines. This year, our training will follow our yearly assessment timeline. That is a document that you have available in your handouts and also on our bit.ly. Within that timeline, we'll talk about all of the steps and actions that need to happen during the preparation and planning period. We'll then go and talk about test administration, and then we'll close out our training today talking about assessment closeout activities. Here are all of the members of our assessment team. We have our director, Danielle, our specialist for science, Daniel, me, Shannon Bell. I work on policy reporting and research, Michael Craig, who works on special populations, Swea Hart, who is our NAEP state coordinator, and Cassie Lynett, who is over our test development, park administration, and education. All of those individuals will be available via email, and you'll see their contact information at the end of this presentation. All right, so we'll start by talking about test integrity and test security in the district. We always start all of our test security trainings by centering ourselves in the goal for this work that we do. At OSSE, our goal is for schools and LEAs and non-publics to deliver a uniform and equitable statewide assessment program. For assessments to yield fair and accurate results, the assessments must be administered in consistent and standardized conditions. The best way to ensure that occurs is to ensure educators understand and recognize acceptable and unacceptable assessment practice. So we know that your non-publics and also the LEAs work really hard to make sure that students are ready to take these assessments. We understand that they take time out of everyday work, and it takes a lot of effort to rearrange classrooms to make them secure, and we really think that it's important to do that so that when students are in the classroom taking these assessments, we are able to accurately see what they can do without interference of adults or any environmental distractions. So our policy overview and documentation. In DC, all of the requirements that I'll go through today are based in law. So we have a Test and Integrity Act of 2013 and 2 amendments in 2015 that kind of serve as the anchor for all of the requirements that we will discuss. In addition to our legal requirements, we also have annually we release a test security guidelines document that is also included in the bit.ly. We also have a post-test investigative protocols document that talks about any steps and requirements that would need to happen if OSSE identifies your school for an investigation after testing. And then we also have guidance that comes from our assessment test coordinator and test administration manuals that are developed by our testing vendors. So the Test and Integrity Act of 2013 and the amendments, this was passed in 2013, of course. In that act, it defines all of our key terms and roles. So all of our responsibilities at the state level here at OSSE, requirements for LEAs, and then requirements for schools, including non-public schools. Also in the original act, it set forth requirements for actions and also provided a list of prohibitive actions that are for all authorized personnel. I'll talk about what authorized personnel means and what those requirements are throughout this training. There were 2 amendments in 2015. The amendments served as further clarification for things that weren't originally clear in the 2013 Act. Some of those clarifications were around school test plan deadlines and certain requirements for training here at OSSE. And it also updated a list of electronics as that does change over time. Our test security guidelines are legal documents that we produce in-house here at OSSE. And I'm sorry, I'm reading a question. Hold on one second. I'm going to put myself on mute because it looks like I received a question here. My apologies. So it seems as though the screen was paused. So thank you for the person who put the question in. Lindsay, thank you very much for that. All of these slides are included in our handout section and also on our bit.ly. So you can go ahead and look back at those introductory slides, but I'm going to keep going for the recording's sake and also for the sake of time. So the test security guidelines and investigative protocols are 2 documents that were released annually and created here at OSSE. The purpose of those documents were to provide further clarification on things that weren't clearly spelled out in the 2 legal documents. They expound on the requirements set forth in the documents, but also we talk about things that aren't included in the legal documents, including test environment requirements, state requirements on exceptional circumstances that we'll talk about later. And then, as I mentioned before, the investigative protocols document sets requirements for what happens after testing if OSSE determines that a school or an LEA needs to participate in an investigative inquiry. For those who have seen our test security guidelines in previous years, the investigative protocol section used to be a part of the guidelines, but starting this year in 2019-20, we have pulled that document out. Other documents that school test coordinators would need to be aware of would be this test coordinator and administrator manuals. These manuals are provided by the vendors for each of our assessments as they're listed here. There are critical instructions for test coordinators. So for you all as non-public school coordinators, there are instructions on how to prep your school for testing, how to store materials, how to distribute them, etc. There's also instructions for the technology coordinators. So for those who will be setting up the technology at each of your schools. And there's also manuals for the test administrators, which would be the people who are actually administering the test to students. There are also procedures and protocols on what to do before, during, and after administration. As I mentioned before, we have our bit.ly that has all of our documents that we'll discuss today, but also in the first link there, you'll see the test security forms and guidelines webpage. This is a site that is a webpage on OSSE's website. It will have every test security and incident reporting form and document that we will use throughout the year. So later in the year, if we come to monitor at your school, we have a monitoring checklist. It is up on this website. If you as a non-public coordinator need to submit an incident report, so a breach of security or integrity happens during testing, you would need to submit an incident report. You can find that incident report there on this website. We'll talk about all of those things as we go through today. All right, so before we talk about our timeline, I wanted to give an overview of our roles and responsibilities as assessment roles as stated in the Test and Integrity Act. So at OSSE, LEAs, schools, and non-publics, we all have unique roles and responsibilities to ensure that there is a consistent and secure statewide test administration. So within the Act, all of these roles were named explicitly. So we have the State Education Agency, which is OSSE. We have our Test Integrity Coordinators, which is a legal term, who are LEA Test Coordinators, your test monitors, which would be you all as school test coordinators, test administrators, proctors, special populations coordinators, and technology coordinators. All of those individuals that I just mentioned are all considered authorized personnel. And these are individuals who would have access to the statewide testing materials or the rooms where students are testing, or will be directly involved in some other way during test administration. All of those individuals have requirements as set by law. And the first one would be to complete some sort of training. So you all are fulfilling that first requirement. Thank you for attending today. You would also receive the Test Integrity and Security Notification Statement. That is one of the documents that you'll see in your handouts section here on this webinar. We'll report breaches of test security and integrity. We'll talk about incident reports later. Cooperate in testing integrity inquiries and investigations. Those are those things that would be listed in that investigative inquiry document I mentioned. We are all required by law to refrain from prohibitive actions and to be aware of all applicable directives and guidance from all of those documents that I just mentioned before. So going down into individual roles within the authorized personnel list of individuals, the first would be the Test and Integrity Coordinator. That would not be any of you all because you are non-public coordinators, but all of your students, your DC students are assigned to one LEA here in DC. That individual who's in charge of testing at the LEA is called the Test and Integrity Coordinator. They are responsible for ensuring testing integrity and security for that LEA and all of its campuses. Non-publics are a bit different because we have you all as non-public coordinators who are responsible for making sure this happens at the school level. But ultimately, the LEA Test Coordinator is responsible for all students within their purview, including those at non-publics. Some of these requirements that are listed here will be a little bit different for non-public schools just because you all are off-site, and we will go through requirements as we go through this training. Some of the things that would be different for non-publics, you all will be submitting school test plans to OSSE, not the LEA Test Coordinator. We'll talk about what that will look like and we'll walk through the system a bit later. Both the LEA Test Coordinator and yourselves as the non-public will be responsible for monitoring schools, so making sure that the testing site is secure, making sure that students are not receiving accommodations that they shouldn't be receiving, and vice versa. LEAs would also be reporting breaches of security, but again, because the LEA is most likely not on your non-public campus, the responsibility would be on you all as the non-public coordinators to make sure that you're reporting any breaches using the website that I mentioned before. The last thing that I'll mention here is the Test and Integrity Affidavit. So that's a document that you as a non-public coordinator and the LEA coordinator must sign for at the end of each assessment. You will be submitting your Test and Integrity Affidavits directly to each of your LEA test coordinators. If you don't know who those people are, you can connect with me afterwards. Shoot me an email. I can connect you to your LEA test coordinators, but we will go in detail about that document at the end. So I kind of mentioned a lot of your responsibilities, but you all would be considered the school test monitor or the non-public test coordinator. These are the individuals are responsible for integrity and security at your non-public school. You have already identified who those individuals are. You would be responsible for making sure that the school test security plan is created and submitted to OSSE, not the test integrity coordinator. You would be conducting administration training for any authorized personnel at your school site, at the non-public. As I said before, you would create the school test plan. We'll talk about. You oversee the security of all secure materials. So secure materials will be the things that are sent from the vendor to your non-public school. Once they get to your school, you all would be responsible for making sure that they are securely stored and remain there until test administration. You would also be there to support any authorized personnel during administration of the tests, and then you would sign and submit those affidavits to the LEA Test Coordinator, as I mentioned before. So then you have the test administrator. So these are the individuals who are actually administering the test. I know that in some non-publics, the test administrator is also the school test coordinator. So I understand that, I recognize that, but there is a role specifically for the test administrator as well. This person would be conducting the sessions as outlined in the test administration manuals, establishing the climate of the testing location. So they'd be making sure that there's no unauthorized things on the walls or any aids or tested content while the students are testing. They would be responsible for distributing test materials to students and getting them back and returning them to the secure location. They would also be responsible for ensuring that students who require accommodations receive those. And then, of course, they'd be responsible for maintaining the security of the testing materials while they have them, so while students are testing. Additional authorized personnel, so there are testing proctors. These would be individuals who are there to help to help the test administrator during test administration, but they would be supervised by the test administrator. They could be the people to administer accommodations or whatever the test administrator needs help with. These individuals can be volunteers, but please note that if a parent is a volunteer, they of course cannot proctor for their own students, as that would be a violation of test security. We also have a special populations coordinator. So this is the individual who would help you all to identify and document all accommodations for your students at the non-public. Excuse me. They would be potentially training test administrators on how to administer accommodations, and they would also be responsible for monitoring testing to make sure that those accommodations are implemented correctly and securely. I also understand that at some non-publics, you would also be the special populations coordinator, and that's fine as well. But if you have the people, this could be another role. The last person who is named in our legal documents is the technology coordinator. So they would be the individuals there to prepare the student devices and the networks before testing, making sure that all of the school's technology is up to date and compatible with the requirements for each of our online testing platforms. They would also be there to troubleshoot and help with any tech issues as they arise during test administration. And just as a note, I have the question section open, and I will only be reviewing the questions after each section because I want to keep this flowing and also make this recording. So the next section is we'll talk about our assessments and our timelines. So these are all of the statewide assessments that we have here in DC. We have NAEP, which is our national assessment. It's a national test. This year is an off year. We have ELA in math grades 4 and 8. We also have our access assessment. So this is our English language proficiency test. There is an access and there is an access alternate. Some of you may have students who are taking access alt. That is also a test. It's grades K through 12. Our PARCC assessment is ELA in mathematics, grades 3 through high school. Our MSAA is our alternate ELA in math, grades 3 through 11. Then we have our DC Science Assessment, which is only in grades 5, 8, and when the student takes high school biology. And then we have DLM, which is our alternate science assessment, which is also 5, 8, and high school biology. Here are our statewide testing windows. So NAEP is an off year. None of your schools would be participating in NAEP, so you don't need to worry about that. But the first assessment that is coming up right around the corner is our Access for ELS assessment. The testing windows are February 17th through March 27th. And then we have our MSAA and DLM assessment, which is March 16th through May 1st. And then we have our online testing for Park and DC Science that runs from April 6th to May 22nd, and our paper testing window that goes from April 6th to May 15th, which is 1 week earlier. Here's just another view of our calendar here. You can see where they overlap. That may help you when you are thinking about how to do your scheduling. And here are those. The last thing in this section that I'll talk about is our test administration coordination timeline. So this is a new document that we created this year in the hopes that it'll help you all as school test coordinators kind of follow the timeline of when things are required and when actions need to be taken. This is a document that is included in your handouts section, and each of these icons that you see will follow how we talk about this training. It's important to note here that some of these requirements are only for the LEA and things that you don't need to worry about or things that have already happened, and I will let you know what those are as we go through this training. And I'll pause just for a second to look at questions. All right. Okay, so this will start the start of our timeline. So we'll talk about all of the steps that have either already happened or in the process that should be happening now for preparation and planning. The first thing that would have already happened at the LEA level, LEAs are responsible for selecting who those school test coordinators are and submitting that information to OSSE. We already have this information, so as I mentioned before, if you know what your LEAs are, but have questions on who the LEA test coordinator is for those LEAs, please feel free to reach out to me via email and I can share that information with you. It will be important for you to know who those individuals are at the LEA level, because at the end of testing, when it's time to submit the test integrity and security affidavits, you will need to submit this information to these individuals. The next step, and that has already happened for some individuals, but something that you all will need to think about, is determining your test windows and submitting that information to OSSE. So at the school test windows are essential scheduling tools because it serves as a foundation for all of the rest of the planning that you'll do at your school. It says here that the LEA is responsible for determining windows, which is true for each school that's in their purview, but for our non-publics, because you are managing what's happening at your school, you would be responsible for determining what those windows are. For Access, MSAA, and DLM, you can choose any testing window as long as it falls between the state test window that I just mentioned. For Park and DC Science, you can only select 30 consecutive school days within our window. So if you break for spring break in the middle of our testing windows, the first day after spring break will just count towards the next consecutive school testing day. If you are the school test coordinator for multiple non-publics in your school system, the testing windows do not need to be the same. As long as they fall within our state window, they can follow whatever schedule makes sense for you. Once you've decided what those test windows are, we ask that you open up a draft school test security plan, and I'll show you how to do that a little later. Select what the assessment is and put in your start and end dates for each of your assessments in our QuickBase application. Keeping in mind too that when you're thinking about your test window, so particularly the end of your testing window, make sure that you buffer in some time for makeup testing. We find that most schools end up needing to use their makeup testing time because things happen and students are not able to test during the scheduled time sometimes. Okay, so this is just another example. This is another look at our testing windows, so you can keep this in mind as you are planning for each of the assessments. A test security reminder here. So school test security plans, we'll talk about them later. They're due 15 business days before the start of each of your school's testing windows. That's the reason why we ask you to go ahead and put that information in our school test security plan QuickBase application, because once you put your intended start date, our system will calculate when your school test plan is due, and it'll be able to send out reminders to you. So if there's anything that I would ask you to do at the end of this training is to think about your windows and put that information in QuickBase so that we can have that information and it can remind you. Okay, this is also something that has already happened, so I'll kind of speed through this, but the next step on the timeline would be to apply for alternate assessments. So this is a step that LEAs work with OSSE to do. Based on information that's provided in the IEPs for students. LEAs will submit applications for alternate assessments for this year. This was something that happened in October. The process goes that the LEA will select each of the students that they believe should take alternate assessments. We at OSSE will then review all of that information and SEDS, review whatever the evidence that they provided and make a determination on whether we believe the student qualifies for the alternate assessment or not. There was an appeal process for this as well, but that has already happened. If you have any questions about students that you believe should be taking alternate assessments, you can contact my colleague, Michael Craig. He'll be able to let you know if that student, what the status of that student is and any next steps that you may need to take. Just a reminder, another test security reminder, that all of our assessments, including our alternate assessments, are considered secure assessments and must adhere to all of our requirements that I'll talk about today. I see a question here about getting access to the test security plan application. I did try to give everyone who applied, who registered for this training access. I made choices on which non-public schools I thought you were registered to based on email addresses. So if you can't log into the system or you see a school that you shouldn't be assigned to, just shoot me an email and I can update that information for you at the end of the training. All right, so the next step here would be to attend this training, which is something that each of you are doing. We host many different types of training, not just our test security training, throughout the year starting in December, with the aims of supporting LEAs in schools with the administration of our assessments. We have a training schedule that you can find here on this link, and it will provide a list of all of our trainings, not just our test security trainings. As I said before, Our test security training is a mandatory training. Everyone, all non-publics and LEAs have to participate, but we do have other optional trainings as well. We follow a train the trainer model, so we will train you all as the non-public test coordinator, and then you all, if you have authorized personnel at your school, you would be responsible for training those individuals, and you're free to use this information. Here are the steps that we take. So we hope what would happen for the trainer would be that you attend our test security training, ask questions virtually, and participate virtually, learn. You would review all of these resources that we provided in the bit.ly and also on our website. Then you would be planning your school level training for the assessments, for whatever assessments your school administers, to whichever individuals would be participating in that. If you have any questions while you're planning out your training, you can reach out to OSSE, but also our assessment vendors with questions or clarifications. Then you would schedule your training dates with your staff, including those training dates in your school test security plan where it asks. And then ultimately you would train all of the authorized personnel at your school and provide them with the test security notification statement prior to when test administration would happen. So trainings that are actually today, we have 2 access trainings. Maybe some of you will have attended our new test coordinator training this morning. Obviously, you're not attending the second one because it's happening at the same time today. For MSAA, there are online trainings that will be available starting in March. And then there's an MSAA test administrator webinar that will be online on March 3rd from 2 to 3. For DLM, there's required new and returning test administration training sessions that will be happening in person on February 7th from 8:30 to 11:30 and then 12:30 to 3:30. You would only need to attend one, and we'll talk about training requirements later. And then for PARC, you'll see that there are a number of trainings here. All of these trainings will be listed on our training website in the link that I just mentioned, but there are some technology webinars, things around test sessions, we have technical assistance, closeout procedures. All of these would be really helpful. They're kind of happening throughout the test administration window. And I would plug that if you have any questions about any of these things on the test administration side, that you participate in these webinars and workshops. All right, so the next step on our timeline would be to register students to test. So each assessment includes a registration process. It will be completed by the LEA, so that's not something that you all would need to worry about. But if you do have students that are DC students who, when you get into the systems, look like they're not registered, you can reach out to your LEA and to OSSE, and we can figure out what's going on. So you don't really need to worry about the participation policy because this is something that OSSE works directly with LEAs. But if you do want to look at our participation policy, because some things have changed this year with regards to high school testing in particular, you can find them on our test security and incident reforms website. Specifically around registering for access, so students who are identified as ELs who have not yet scored a 5 or higher on the access assessment will be registered by OSSE to take the assessment. Access coordinators will use the pre-ID QuickBase. This is an LEA thing that had already happened to verify demographic information, indicate accommodations, etc. This already happened in December. This would be an instance that once you get into the access system, if you see students that are DC students that are missing or you have questions, feel free to reach out to my colleague, Michael Craig, and we can walk you through what needs to happen. For MSAA, for students in grades 3 through 8 and 11 who have an alternate assessment eligibility that has been approved, would have already been registered to the test by OSSE. So again, this is not something that you need to worry about. Only reach out if you have questions or you feel like you have DC students who are missing from the system once you get in. Same thing for DLM, which is our alternate science assessment. Students in grades 5 and 8 who have the alternate assessment eligibility determination, they would have been registered by OSSE. If you have students that are taking high school biology course, they would be registered by the LEA. So if you have high school, if you're a non-public that serves high school students, and you have students that are taking high school biology, and they're missing from the system, once you get in, you would reach out to that student's LEA because they are responsible for registering them. The PARCC assessment is a test that's taken annually by students in 3 through 8. Those students are registered, or students who are registered to certain high school courses. If there, as I said before, there are updates to our participation policy. So if you're interested in reading that information for our high school assessments, feel free to do that. This is something that the LEA would be responsible for registering these students for. The same for high school biology. But again, if you see students that are in your schools that are DC students and they don't appear to be registered, once you get access, reach out to your LEA and or OSSE. For PARCC and DC Science, registration aligns with each student's enrolled grade or course. OSSE will register any students in grades 3 through 8. OSSE will also register all students in grades 5 and 8 for DC Science. The LEA is responsible for verifying PARCC and DC Science registration for 3 through 8 and to make any adjustments for students in grades 7 and 8 who may be taking advanced mathematics courses. If you do have students who are taking advanced math courses in 7th or 8th, and when you get in the system, it's showing their enrolled grade, that would be a time that you would reach out to your LEA because they can make the adjustment. Your LEAs would also be registering all high school students for PARCC and DC Science. As I mentioned before, if there's an issue, reach out to them. They can make the change in the system. For PARCC and DC Science, registration is uploaded in the Pearson Access Next system in a spreadsheet that we call the Student Registration and Personal Needs Profile, so the SRP&P. In that file, there are some things that are included there. There's the LEA and school code, the student name, the USI, birth dates, current grade, and some other demographic information. You will be interacting with the SRP&P file when you are checking accessibility features and accommodations that we'll talk about in a second. So there are some directions on the SRP&P file, and you can find them in our Pearson Access Next link here. I will also plug that in a training that will be happening in February or March, there is a webinar that is just about correctly filling out the SRP&P. So if you have questions, I would suggest that you participate in that training. A reminder here, it's important to make sure that students are accurately registered for the test before submitting your school test security plan. For non-public specifically, making sure that students have accommodations listed and accessibility features listed in their SRP&P file. We do review that information to make sure that it is complete before we can approve your school test security plan. All right, next step here, I mentioned before that you would be interacting with the SRP&P for PARCC and DC Science because you would assign students accommodations. So accommodations and accessibility features are identified for each student in advance through each assessment's online platform. Accommodations require IEPs, 504 plans, or EL plans. Accessibility features are not required by any of those plans. They can be assigned to any student based on the policies that are established either by the LEA the student is assigned to or your non-public school. Students are entitled to accommodations in their IEP, 504, and EL plans. Failing to provide students with the accommodations listed in these plans is not only a violation of their rights, but also also a violation of test security. So please keep that in mind when you're interacting with these students' registration files or what's in the system, making sure that it's consistent with what is provided in any of these plans. So steps for assigning accommodations. So at your non-public school, you would have had an individual called the Special Populations Coordinator. As the non-public coordinator, you would work with that person at your school to create policies to assign accommodations and accessibility features effectively. At the LEA and school level, there should be policies created to ensure that accessibility features are assigned equitably to each of your students. Accommodations and accessibility features should be reflective of the student's typical testing environment. So we don't want when they're taking these statewide assessments for them to not receive what they normally receive while they're testing. So making sure that that is consistent. The other thing to keep in mind here is that students should practice using those accommodations and accessibility features before they begin testing. Once testing begins, the test administrator and the proctor should not be teaching the student how to use the accessibility features or the accommodations or assisting them to use them unless, of course, the accommodation requires that adult to interact with the student to administer it. For access specifically, students taking the access assessment may require the assignment of accommodation, universal tools, or administrative considerations. Accommodations must be assigned in the pre-ID file. That was something that would have already happened at the LEA level during registration. Access coordinators would use the pre-ID QuickBase application to assign accommodations. You don't need to worry about that. Universal tools and administrative considerations can be assigned to any student prior to or during testing. So if, as you are administering, there are administrative considerations, you would have the ability after you have been trained to make those updates. Documentation of the use of these tools is not required for access. For MSAA, students taking the MSAA will require the use of accommodations and or accessibility features. Please reference the MSAA Test Administration Manual. That's a manual that's provided by the vendor for a list of available accommodations. Any accommodations listed in the student's IEP may be used during administration of MSAA. Similarly, for DLM, or Science Alternate Assessment, a test administrator is prompted to complete the first contact survey for each registered student. The results of this survey determine the accommodations in the DLM system. There is no additional action needed to assign accommodations for DLM. Park and DC Science. So Park and DC Science accommodations and accessibility features are identified for students in the SRP&P. So in that personal needs profile section of the file. That's what you would be interacting with. Information in the SRP&P is used by Pearson to provide digital supports for students and to ship any necessary physical testing materials to students. The SRP&P accommodations should be completed by late February, so that's coming up soon. The reason why we require that P&P information to be uploaded and updated by then is so that Pearson, the vendor for Park and DC Science, have time to ship those materials to schools. If students' accommodations change because their IEP 504 or EL plans change, they can be updated at any time. Just keeping in mind that if the student does require a physical accommodation, that there would be additional time needed for Pearson to send that new information to your school. Accessibility features do not require materials from Pearson, so they can be completed at any time before submission of the school test security plan, because we do look at that information before we approve your plans. Another reminder here, ensure that the information is accurate and it is updated and uploaded into the testing systems before you submit your test security plan. We do review, as I said before, particularly for Park and DC Science, we review the SRPMP file to make sure that there is information in the accessibilities and accommodation section before a test plan is approved. There has been times that we have pulled the SRPMP file and saw that there was no accommodation and accessibility feature information at all for any students. And in that case, we push back your plan because it doesn't appear that any work has been done there. All right, the next step here would be assigning staff at your schools to testing roles. So at the LEA level, but particularly at the non-public school test coordinator level, you are responsible for assigning authorized personnel to each of these roles at your school. So you have yourselves as a school test coordinator. You also have the special populations coordinator, the technology coordinator, the test administrator, and the test proctor. Assignments may require access to online systems. So you would need to review the test manuals for each of those tests provided by the vendor to ensure the authorized personnel have the access they need for each of these roles. I will also plug our training schedule because there are trainings for each of our assessments that can help you through this process. Reminder here, all authorized personnel must be trained on test security and administration and receive that test integrity and security notification statement prior to the start of the test administration window for each assessment. Assigning roles specific for access. So access coordinators who have registered with OSSE were recently provided with accounts in WIDA AMS. The user accounts allow test coordinators to provide user access to test administrators and other authorized personnel. If you have students who are taking the access assessment at your non-public and you have not received access to WIDA AMS, please reach out to my colleague, Michael Craig. He can help you get the access you need because you as the non-public test coordinator would then be assigning other users. So it's important that you have access first. For MSAA, MSAA test coordinators who have registered with OSSE will receive access to the MSAA system in March. So look out for that soon. Those user accounts will allow you all to provide access to your test administration and administrators and other authorized personnel. You should look out for communication from Michael Craig as well. He manages our MSAA system, so he'll be providing that access soon. DLM. For DLM, the DLM coordinator, so if you have students who are taking alternate science in grades 5, 8, or when they take biology in high school, you would be the main point of contact between OSSE, the DLM service desk, and whatever the LEA is for that student. The key duty of the assessment coordinator is managing staff and educator roles and responsibilities in the educator portal, so that's the system. Monitor staff roles and whether the account is active, pending, or inactive. You would be monitoring the test administrator completion of all security agreements and trainings in the educator portal. And then before you serve in that role, the DLM test administrators must complete the required test administration training online or in person at OSSE. So I mentioned the DLM test administrators training that's happening, I think, in March. But there are also online versions that I'll talk about later. And then completing the DLM security agreement. Park and DC Science test coordinators who have registered with OSSE should have recently received their accounts for Pearson Access Next. So that's the system for Park and DC Science. If you have not received access to Park and DC Science, please reach out to Cassie Lynett. All of our contact information will be at the end and you'll see the assessment, so you don't need to remember it now. But Cassie manages the system and will be able to provide you with the access, because once you get access to the system, you would then be able to provide access to the test administrators at your non-public. Resources for each Park and DC Science role can be found in the Park and DC Science Test Coordinator and Test Administration manuals. The manuals will be available this month, and paper copies will be shipped in your boxes that you'll receive in March. Test coordinators and test administrators are responsible for reading those manuals and performing the duties as they are outlined. I see a question here, if you need to register yearly or if it's automatic. You do need to register yearly. I would suggest if you have played the role of any of these tests in previous years, please just reach out to the team member here at OSSE to make sure that we have that information. But I do know that it is updated on an annual basis. Okay, so the next step on the timeline would be to establish the school test security file. The school test security file is something that is required for every school. Every school is required to keep a hard copy collection of papers, so it could be in a file folder, and it could also be in a binder. It's required for you to have that information on file in hard copy for 4 years. So we have a document that's in the bit.ly and also on our website that lists out all of the things that you should be keeping in your file. So I won't read through them here, but these are things that as we hope that the file is helpful to keep you organized, so that as you are doing each of these steps during administration and also during preparation, that you're keeping evidence of this information. The reason why it's important for you to have a test security file and make sure that it's updated, because we do monitor non-publics sometimes, and when we do that, we do request to see your test security file. The other reason why test security files are important to keep on hand is that if your school needs to participate in an investigation at the end of testing for some reason, we do require all of the documents that are in the file. All right, so the next thing that would be happening potentially in the next few weeks if you're taking access, but as we get closer to the assessments in the next few months, is to receive testing materials. So assessments often require secure and accommodated materials that need to be shipped from the vendor to your schools. Some of the things that you may receive could be a testing manuals, test booklets, answer sheets, accommodated testing materials, return shipping materials, answer booklets, etc. When receiving the shipment, please check to make sure that anything that you ordered has been provided. As soon as you receive those materials, those things are secure materials, so they should not be accessible to anyone else. So it's making sure that you, as soon as you get them, you have your secure location that you will be able to keep these materials locked away before testing. Real quick before I move on, I do see a question about testing files. Your file is not something that you will send to anyone. You just keep it on file. You just keep it at your school just to be available just in case someone requests to see it, but it's not something that you need to send anywhere. Okay, for access, you're receiving materials. So ordering access assessment materials take place during student registration that happened during the pre-ID file. So this is something that would have already happened. It's important that that file is accurate and complete, because that is what our vendor uses as a basis for what to send to the school. Test coordinators should complete the following when materials are received. So you should watch the managing test materials tutorial, which is linked in the PDF version of this presentation. Receive and inventory and distribute test materials to designated staff when the time comes, and to report the amount and type of overage to OSSE. So that's something that you would report to Michael Craig because he manages the access assessment. For MSAA testing materials can be downloaded from the MSAA online system. To administer this assessment, test coordinators will need to download the following materials. So there is a DTA, which is the Directions for Test Administration. And then there's a Test Administration Manual, which is colloquially called the TAM. Students with paper-based accommodations will require paper testing materials. Those will be sent from the vendor to your school. Test coordinators will use the additional materials ordering process to order any accommodated paper materials. For DLM assessment does not have any type of physical testing materials that will ship to schools. All supports will be provided through the online system, so you don't need to worry about receiving anything for DLM. The SRP&P file is used to determine what materials each school needs to support students with accommodations for Park and DC Science. Please ensure that the accommodations are accurately updated in the SRP&P file by late February. Materials will begin to arrive in March. If an accommodation changes, as I mentioned before, you can make those updates in the system, but please keep in mind that orders take 1 to 2 weeks to arrive at schools, so plan accordingly. Each school will receive a test coordinator manual and test administration manuals. They will arrive with your school's assessment material shipments. Review the contents of the manuals and share the test administrator manuals with your staff so that they are aware of their testing responsibilities. The test coordinator and test administrator manuals will be available online in January. So if you want to look at them before the boxes get to you in March, you can do that. You can download them at this site here, also linked in the PDF version of this training. Secure and scorable materials will need to be returned to Pearson at the end of testing. So until they are returned, they must be kept in that locked place that you put them as soon as you receive them in March. Shipments from Pearson will include labels and packaging for returning secure materials. Keep those materials for use at the end of testing. Additional orders do not include return shipment materials. If you will need return materials that you don't already have, you can order them with whatever else you're ordering on the system. Return shipments must be sent back to Pearson within 5 school days of the last day of testing. You can contact UPS to schedule a pickup because we don't want you to be like driving secure materials in your personal cars to UPS. So have UPS come and pick up the materials directly from your school and provide them with the details that are listed on the shipping label that Pearson has already like pre-filled out for you. A reminder here, any testing materials that include testing content or that could assist in authorized access to the testing platform, so like the testing ticket, is considered a secure material and must be securely stored as soon as it is delivered or printed out. So examples of that would be test booklets or answer documents, read aloud scripts for students with accommodations, as I said before, testing tickets. Any of those things are secure and must be locked and stored away when testing is not occurring. All right, the next step on our timeline is to create a school test schedule. So each school is required to prepare a testing schedule for each statewide assessment administered and submit that schedule to OSSE as part of their school test security plan. Schedules will be used to determine test monitoring, support staff, and deadlines for deliverables to OSSE. We do have a template for that schedule. It is in our school test security plan tool. I'll show you when we talk about that in a couple of minutes. But you're not required to use our template. You can use whatever works for you, whatever you're using at your non-public school, so long as it has this information listed here, there. You'll see in the school test security plan document that when we ask for you to upload whatever your school test schedule looks like, we list out these requirements as well. So if you want to make sure that you have all the information, you can use our template, but if something else works for you, use that, but make sure that this information is there. Reminder, most updated version of the school test schedule must be uploaded into our test plan application at all times. If we do decide to come monitor at your school, we want to make sure that we have the most updated information so that we are not showing up to your schools when you are not testing. Considerations for access when thinking about your school test schedule. At the school level, you are going to create the access testing schedule. You can view our testing schedule tutorial linked in the PowerPoint or in the PDF version. All testing must be completed by the end of the statewide testing window, which is March 27th. Kindergarten and alternate access should be scheduled on one sessions. So please, if you have students who are in kindergarten or you have alternate access testers, please make sure that you're thinking about those one-on-one sessions when you're thinking about scheduling. For MSAA and DLM, at the non-public level, you are responsible for creating the testing schedule for both MSAA and DLM. Test administration for DLM and MSAA is always one-on-one. MSAA testing sessions may consist of 1 or 2 items at a time, or 10 or more items depending on the student's ability level. For DLM, the DLM assessment includes 9 to 10 testlets, which take about 15 minutes each to administer. The DLM system takes another 10 to 15 minutes to generate that new information. So keep all of that in mind when you're planning out schedules for DLM. Test administrators may pause the MSAA or DLM test at any time based on what the students need. So students may need to take breaks as they need to. Those breaks can consist of several minutes or several days, just depending on what the student needs. So keep all of those things in mind when you're making your schedule, but please remember that the end of statewide test window for MSAA and DLM is May 1st. So all testing, including makeup testing, needs to happen and be scheduled before then. For Park and DC Science, you would be responsible for creating that schedule as well. Things to keep in mind for Park and DC Science, the testing window may not exceed 30 consecutive school days. So school holidays and weekends don't count as school days, so that includes spring break. Park and DC Science windows can be established separately. So if you're non-public and you have students taking Park and DC Science, they don't have to run at the same time. They can run however it makes sense. So those 30 consecutive days don't have to run at the same time. Unit and unit times can be found in the Park and DC Science Test Coordinator manuals. Things to consider for the ELA field test for this year will be taken in students' grades 10, so English 2 and 6. So that will be in a one additional unit, so they would have 4 in total, and that should be considered when you're thinking about your testing schedule. End times for students who are taking the accommodated paper tests, those have to be completed by May 22nd, which is 1 week before the online testing, which needs to be completed by May 22nd. the next step would be to set up testing sessions. Before testing can begin, students must be assigned to the testing session in many of the online assessment systems. Test sessions allow the LEA and school test coordinators to group students who are testing together and schedule and manage student testing in the online platform. For assessment, for access, access is a computer-based assessment that requires students and staff's information to be loaded in the system, WIDA AMS. WIDA AMS is an online platform used for test administration and materials management. As the non-public test coordinator, you're responsible for confirming that all students are listed in WIDA AMS, so all of your DC students, and are assigned to testing sessions before testing begins. You're also responsible for adding any new students to WIDA AMS and assigning them to test sessions. More information on how to do that, you can attend one of our trainings or reach out to our access lead. For MSAA, students taking MSAA must be assigned to the testing sessions called classrooms for testing. This allows the test administrator to obtain testing and login information for that student. For DLM, test administrators for DLM should take the following steps to set up students for testing. They should create student rosters for each test administrator, submit the first contact survey for each student. And remember that contact survey is also will be used to determine what accommodations will be provided in the system for students, for DLM. For PARC and DC Science, each student taking PARC and DC Science must be assigned to a test session in Pearson Access Next. Directions for setting up test sessions can be found in the PARC and DC Science Test Coordinator Manual. Test sessions must be created in the format of the naming conventions below prior to approval of the school test security plan. Each test session that is created must be assigned a test administrator. The use of a test administrator naming convention below is also required. So this is something that is one of the #1 reasons why school test plans for DC Science and PARC are pushed back. It is most likely because in the SRP&P file, the naming conventions are not in the correct order. So when you're going through the SRP&P and you're filling out information on each of these students in the system, please make sure that you follow this subject grade, TA initials, which means the test administrator's initials, and then regular or makeup. And for the test administrator information, that you put the last name first, the last name, and then the first name. And if you have questions about this, you can reach out to me or Cassie, and we can help you do this in the system while you're filling it out. Reminder, please ensure that test sessions have been accurately created before submitting your test security plan. We do review test sessions to ensure that they're complete. So again, if you have questions about this, please reach out to us and we can help you in the system. Next thing on the timeline would be to set up student testing devices. So prior to testing, students' devices must be prepared for test administration. The tech coordinator should review the specifications for each assessment to ensure that devices are ready. The things that need to happen, so you review the device requirements, update software if that's needed, download the applications or create shortcuts to the website links so the students have access to that when it's time to test. Ensure that your systems have the appropriate bandwidth required for administration. Failure to complete these steps appropriately could result in testing delays and issues with student devices, so it's really important to make sure that they are prepped and ready before testing begins. Specific things to keep in mind for access. So WIDA AMS is an online platform. It's used for test administration and materials management. Technology coordinators are responsible for installing the central office service, the COS system device, and the service device, SD, for all testing devices. There is a technology user guide that the technology coordinators can review for support. MSAA and DLM are computer-based assessments managed through the MSAA online assessment system and the KITE suite, respectively. Students take the assessments through these platforms. Before testing, test administrators should log into the MSAA online assessment system and the KITE suite to ensure that the laptop, computer, or tablet login information and any necessary assessment features are working as they should. Make sure that that computer, any AAC or assistant technology device the student may use meets the minimum requirements and are in working order and available for testing, and making sure that they're compatible. So there is a MSAA online assessment system user guide for test administrators and the KITE suite requirements. Both of those links are on the PDF version of this presentation that the technology coordinator should be reviewing in order to prep these devices. Park and DC Science are computer-based tests. The app that students use to take this test is called TestNav. TestNav must be accessible on all testing devices, and it can be downloaded as an app, as I just said. Updating the TestNav app annually is required. For details about compatibility between TestNav and devices used at your school, you can read the TestNav system requirements document or have your technology coordinator do so. In order to better understand how to use TestNav, there is an online user guide that you can use following the links in this presentation. Okay, so the next step that you would be doing in preparation and planning is to submit your school test security plan to OSSE. The school test security plan. So OSSE requires every school, including our non-public schools that will administer a statewide assessment, to complete and submit a school test security plan prior to the start of the school's testing window. The school test security plan serves as official communication with OSSE of the school's plan for administering the district-wide or statewide assessment. OSSE monitors will visit schools, so we do visit non-publics. We will visit your non-public school and make sure that what you have submitted is accurate and what is actually happening at your school. So it's really important that you put real and accurate information in your plan. All school test plans must be submitted to OSSE and approved for approval at least 15 days prior to the first day of testing for each of your assessments. We'll go through the system, so I won't read through these, but here's a list of all of the information that we ask for in your school test security plan. Most of these questions in the school test plan are a short answer form or multiple choice. We do have a few attachments that we require, which would be the list of all of the authorized personnel at your school and a detailed testing schedule. Over the years, we have at OSSE, we review every single school's plan every year. So I've thought about some things that are helpful to remember. Plans that are typically approved are clear and organized. They're thoughtful and thorough. So we do read each response, and if things are not clear or are kind of runoffs or not fully answered, we do push things back. We do ask for clarification. So making sure that when you are submitting things that it's not in shorthand or something, so that we know what to look for if we do end up at the school. Other strong plans have complete authorized personnel lists. complete schedules that have all of those requirements that I mentioned before. For Park and DC Science specifically, as I mentioned a few times, we do look at the SRP&P file and make sure that there are test sessions, accommodations, and test administrators as well. Other things that I'll plug for the weak side, we have seen test plans that have been directly copied. We provide an exemplar, so I have a PDF version. It's in the bit.ly and on our website that has each of the questions that we ask and sample responses and other hints and tips on how to answer these questions in a way that will get your plan approved. I have seen plans that have copied those words verbatim. We will send the plan back if it is exactly what is written in our plan, because we do want each school to really think about what is going to work for the dynamics and circumstances at each of your schools. As I mentioned, we do offer some support in completing this document. So we have on our website test plan instructions. We also have our exemplar document that I just talked about. We also have templates for our authorized personnel and test schedules. You don't have to follow either of those templates, but if you do, it has all of the required columns that we are looking for in order to approve plans. In addition to those documents, I also host office hours. I know a lot of you are not near DC, but for those who are and can make it, I do host a monthly office hour where people can come in and ask specific questions about their test plan, or if they just like to come in and work on their test plan and ask questions as they need to, you can come to that space. If you, of course, are not able to come in, you can also shoot me an email or give me a call, and I can provide support that way as well. All the documents that we provide are on our test security and incident report website. They should also be in the bit.ly that we provided during today's training. So right now we will go through the test security plan system, just so that you can see what you should be looking at as you're filling out your plan. So this is your homepage. Someone asked before if you already have access. Most of you who have either participated in previous years or registered for this training today, I tried to give you access. Again, if you're not able to access the system right now, please shoot me an email and I can provide you with that support later. There are some of you who are completely new to our system and you'll need to register in our quickbase.com website. Once you fill out your username information and your password, you'll be able to go back to the email that invited you to this application, and you'll be able to get in. Once you do log in, this is the Nonpublic homepage. You'll see some information here that provides you with some instructions. If there's any new information or changes to the system, I will put it in this text section, and I'll probably put like a red new information so that you know. In this section here, there are some resources for you. This is last year's webinar, but once this webinar has been completed, I will update a link with the new webinar, so you can always go back and review this training again, or skip through to parts that you need help remembering. That's here. You'll also have a link to the updated test security plan instructions. You'll also have an updated exemplar for Nonpublic that will be posted later today. You'll also be able to go to our test security and incident reporting page. So that's the website that has all of our test security documents. It's also where you would go if you want to submit an incident report during testing. You can find that here. There's also another website here, which is the Test Coordinator resources page. So this page will give you information on each of the assessments. So you'll be able to find links to test administration manuals, our training schedule. All of that information is found on our coordinator resource page, and you can access this from our QuickBase application. The last link here is just a link on if you wanted to start a new test plan, and we'll come back to that. This first report that you see is the My School Plans 2019-20. So once you start your school test plans, you'll be able to see the status of each of those plans. This is where we want you to go into the system and let us know what your start and end dates are and start plans for each of your assessments for your school. In this section, you'll see, of course, your school once you select them, and you'll see what the assessment is based on what you've checked. This is also a good place to look once you've submitted your plans and you have submitted them for OSSE review. We'll be able to change the status here, and it'll say things like revisions submitted or revisions required or approved or whatever. You'll be able to view that here and make the edits as you see fit. This next section are students without reports. So this is a report. This section will show any schools that we at OSSE believe that your school will have students taking any of these assessments. And if you haven't started a plan, you'll see them here. If for those of you who are able to log into the system now, if you see schools in the section that should not be there, just shoot me an email and I can update our system. The last thing that you'll see on your homepage is a list of any schools school test plans that were approved last year from you. You won't see these because these are this is my user view, but from your account, based on what your school is, you'll be able to see those. This may be helpful for you, especially if you're new, to see what an approved plan looked like at your school from last year. It may also help if you were here last year and you did get an approved plan. It'll be able to help you see the responses that you put in that will be approved. So now that you've seen the homepage, we're going to go into an actual test plan. So when you click on add a new test plan, it will take you to this document. This is our school test plan for non-publics. The first question here will just ask you who you are. Make sure that you put non-public coordinator. We have seen in previous years that non-publics have either left this blank or put LEA or even put school test coordinator. We ask that you please put non-public coordinator because it helps us with our record keeping purposes to keep our non-public plans and our school plans correctly labeled. This next section here is our assessment section. So this is the section where you would select what assessments you'll be submitting a plan for. As you can see here, you can select all of your assessments at once. So if you want to send one master plan that has all of the information for all of your assessments, you're free to do that. Just keep in mind that your plan will be due 15 days before the earliest test. So if you're submitting a test plan for access all the way to DC Science, keep in mind that even if you're not planning on starting DC Science until April, if you're starting access in February, the whole plan will be due 15 days before that February date. So for these purposes, I'll just keep access only. So you'll see here that as you check and uncheck things, some things will be required and unrequired. For whatever you're selecting, make sure that you're putting in the start and end date. So as I mentioned, all the way back at the beginning of the prep stages, we want you to select your start and end dates and start your plan. As you see here, once you select a date, the system will calculate when a test plan is due for you. So I would suggest that as soon as you have selected your start and end dates, that you put that in the system and save and close your draft so that the system will remind you and will have record that you've started your test plan. So once you put in that information here, You'll move on to section 4 that selects your school. Here, I'm only assigned to Apple Tree in the system, so I can only see Apple Tree schools. This is another check for you to make sure that you have the correct schools, that we have the correct schools listed for you. So once you're in the system, if you're seeing a drop down here and you don't see your school, just shoot me an email and I can update the system for you. Here you will put in your information and email and phone numbers. And then this section is something that is only for non-publics that I would like to walk you through. So this section in the new LEA MP plan, this is where you will let OSSE know what LEAs you are assigned to. So in order to do that, you would go here in the related LEA section. There's a blank here, and you would just double click it. Once you double click, you'll be able to see all of the LEAs here at DCPS. You'll find your LEA. So just click one, and then the information will automatically show up. If you have multiple LEAs that you service at your non-public, you can just go in and keep selecting however many you have at your LEA. Make sure that this is completed and you filled it out, and you have all of your LEAs here, because once your plan is approved, we want all of the LEA test coordinators to have access to this plan so that they are aware of your procedures, and they won't be able to view your plan if they're not listed here. So fill out that information and then you can move on. The rest of the plan, there are just a series of questions that require short responses or long responses that you'll be able to fill out. You can follow, you'll see that there are different types of questions here that require different types of answers. You'll see multiple choice, you'll see check boxes, you'll see long answers here. One thing to notice that some of these questions are conditional, so if you answer yes to some of them, we'll ask for more information. So just keep all of that in mind as you're working through this plan. Once you scroll down and you get to the bottom after you answered all the questions, we have 2 requirements that I mentioned before, the authorized personnel list and this test schedule. As you'll see here, there are templates here that you can click on and download that has all of the required information that's listed here. You're not required to follow and use this template, but we do suggest that you use it because it's the best way to ensure that all of the information is needed. Once you have completed all of these questions and uploaded your templates, you will change the status here. Once it's ready to be submitted, you just change it to submitted status. You'll get this notification here, click OK, and you'll save it and close it. If you're still working on your plan, so you want to start it, let's say you go in and you want to just put in your start and end dates and maybe your LEA information, you can always leave it in draft status, save it and close it. Select a school here, save it and close it. And once you do that, it'll take you back to your home page. As you can see here, once I started that new plan, you'll be able to see whatever your new plans are in the My School Plans section of this system. The only other thing that I'll show you in this system is once your plan has been approved, there is going to be a new section here at the bottom for your once your plan is approved, there's a minor deviation section. So this is the section that if there are changes that are happening at your school that are deviating from what your approved plan said, this is the information, this is where you would put that information. You would just type in whatever that information is and then press save. That way we'll have a record of any changes that you had. So changes could be changes in your schedule, changes in authorized personnel or whatever, you put that here. While I'm here, I do want to have one note here. If there are revisions that we require here at OSSE, we will, once your plan is submitted, we'll review it. We'll select on these revisions, and we will have, at OSSE, we'll have the option of putting in information and telling you exactly what the revisions will be. and then we'll submit this to you. Once you've completed whatever the revisions are, you will be able to change the status to revisions submitted. This is how you'll be able to communicate with OSSE that your plan is ready for a second or third round of review. Please make sure that you're selecting revisions submitted here. I've seen a few times when we are in revisions that non-publics will select submitted. It kind of pushes your plan back to the beginning initial review. We want to make sure that it's in revisions submitted. So please make sure that if we're in revisions going back and forth, you're selecting revisions submitted. All right. So that is our system, and we will go back to our presentation. All right. So test security reminder here. The school test security plans must be submitted 15 days before the first day of testing. OSSE's review period is typically 5 to 10 days. So if your plan is submitted late or revisions are not reconciled within 5 days of the start of your test, testing may be delayed. Another reminder here, testing cannot begin until the school test security plan is approved by OSSE. All right, so the next thing after your school test security plan has been reviewed and approved is to train your authorized personnel at your school. So non-public coordinators must train all authorized personnel on test security and administration prior to the start of testing administration. This is the flow of that. So we will train you in this webinar, and then you will go on to train your authorized personnel at your schools. That training, we do not specify exactly the materials that you must use during the training, but we do require that each of the trainings include the following information. So we ask that you distribute the test integrity and security notification statement that's attached to this webinar. You review whatever your school test plan is, because by this time your plan will hopefully be reviewed, so you can review those procedures with your staff. You will review the test security guidelines, any test administration procedures that are in any of the testing manuals that the vendors will be supplying. Who are the people that require training? Any person who is interacting with students or testing materials need to be trained. So that includes you as a test monitor, any other people who may be going in and out. So if you have staff who are monitoring testing, those individuals would need to be trained. Test administrators, of course, test proctors if you have them, other authorized personnel. So you have nurses, custodial staff, office managers, any person who could potentially need to be in a space where a student is testing should be trained. How should training be documented? We have a training, in your test security file, we ask that whatever the training materials you use, that you include that in your test security file. If you have a sign-in sheet, include that, and then also a copy of the test security notification statement. We do provide the PowerPoint version of this training. You can provide that to your staff as well. Another reminder here, authorized personnel must be trained before test administration can begin. Training things specifically for access. So access is administered to small groups or individual students by a trained test administrator. The Access Test Administration Manual provides testing time, guidance on setup, information about materials, and directions on how to use online testing system. Test administrators must take the following actions prior to administering the access test assessment. So they need to all view the online training modules, complete the online administration quiz, and pass with an 80 or higher. This is only for the test administrators who are doing this for their first year. For all other test administrators, we do require that they recertify on the speaking domain and get an 80 or higher. MSAA is administered to individual students by a test administrator. The DTA provides scripts and instructions and should be used throughout the testing process. Test administrators need to do the following prior to administering. They need to view the online training modules, complete the online training module quizzes, and pass with the score of 80 or higher. The DLM assessment requires test administrators to complete new and returning test administration training prior to serving in the role during test administration. The training is available online. If your test administrators who are local, for those who are local, would like to attend in-person training, you can look at these training sessions below. The only one that is still available will be on February 7th, but because most of you are out of state, there are online trainings as well. DLM test coordinators who do not attend the in-person training, so all of you can find the necessary information on this link here, the district staff training page on the DLM portal. DLM administrators interested in completing their training online should review the guide to DLM required test administrator training. This guide includes information about accessing the online DLM Moodle training site. The module for test administrators take approximately 2 hours for new test administrators, and if there are returning test administrators, it's about 35 minutes. So keep that in mind when test administrators are preparing to train. For Park and DC Science do not require any sort of test administrator trainings or quizzes prior to serving the role during test administration. Test administrators receive their test security and administration training from you. When they are receiving their test security training, they should also be learning about administering Park and DC Science. We do offer optional training. As I mentioned before, we have a training schedule. Please review that. A lot of those trainings are webinars, so you'll be able to participate and give the support that you and your school staff need prior to administration. Okay. Next step would be to send assessment notification letters to families. Every school is required to send home a notification letter to families, letting them know that their student will participate in statewide testing. We do provide a sample letter with translations at this link, so please feel free to click on that if you would like to use that as your template. If you do not want to use it as a template, we do require that the letter provides information to families, letting them know the dates and the purpose of testing, and we do ask that there is at least one copy of the sample letter included in your test security file. Reminder here, please ensure that a copy of the notification letter to families is included in the file because we do ask to see that letter when we come to schools during monitoring visits. All right, so now we are at test administration. I'm gonna take just 2 minutes to reset and look at the questions that All right, so we are now on to test administration. So to reground us back into this work, this is our mantra here at OSSE. All right, so the first step during test administration will be to set up the testing environment. So in order to facilitate consistency and security during test administration throughout the district and its non-publics, it is essential for students to only have access to the allowable testing materials outlined in the test assessment manuals. Access to additional materials or tools are prohibited. All authorized personnel are responsible for ensuring that the testing environment is free of content that may provide students with unfair advantage during testing. So here is an example of a classroom that has a lot of things that would not be allowable during testing. So as we said before, we want to make sure that things on the walls are not there that would provide an undue advantage to students during testing. So some examples would be things like this, which would be skills for steps for success, which could potentially be test taking strategies. We wouldn't want things like student work on the boards here because there's 100%, so students could see this and it could potentially assist them. We don't want formulas or life cycle or timelines. Any of this information could potentially assist the student in some way, and we want to make sure that the testing environment is free of this type of information during testing. So, non-permissible bulletin and wall displays. So wall displays with tested content or test taking strategies must be removed and covered in the testing room, hallways, stairwells, or bathroom throughout testing. Displays must be removed or covered prior to the first day of testing and remain covered or removed for the duration. So this doesn't mean that the wall displays have to be covered at all times during the testing window. They just need to be covered while the students are actually testing. So if it is, it's your discretion at your school if you would like to cover and uncover things daily as students are testing and not testing, or if you'd like to keep things covered or removed throughout the time. We just ask that the materials are covered while students are testing within the window. Also, questions that we do receive about hallway, stairwells, and bathrooms. These spaces only need to be covered if there is a possibility that a student may move through that space during testing. So if there's a testing room or a testing section of your school, and there are hallways that a student would need to walk through to potentially go to the restroom during testing, all of those spaces need to be covered. If there are other parts of your building where students would not be moving through during testing at all, those spaces do not have to be covered. It's only those spaces where students could potentially be moving during testing that need to follow these requirements. This would be an example of that same classroom with the materials completely removed that were not allowable. Here's another example of what your school may elect to do. You can decide to just cover the materials as seen in this photo. Speaking around room and desk arrangements, we do not require students to be seated in any specific order or arrangement. We do just require that whatever is happening in the classroom makes it so that students are not able to view each other's content or potentially assist each other during testing. So some things that we've seen that worked are having students seat every other seat or arrange their monitors back to back. Students could sit back to back themselves or in a semicircle or widely spaced rows or whatever configuration works in the testing location, so long as students are not viewing each other's work. There are some special circumstances here. These special circumstances are also outlined in our guidelines. If you have any questions around specific things that are happening at your school, either because of an accommodation or constraints in your classrooms, please just reach out to us and we'll be able to assist. A reminder here, testing content and test taking strategies must be covered during testing. As I said before, you can choose to uncover them when students are not testing. If you do have questions on a particular wall display on if it is considered testing content or test taking strategies, you can just reach out to me and I can provide you with guidance on specific things. I would just say to err on the side of caution when you're thinking about what to cover or not. If you're questioning it, it's most likely best practice to just cover it during testing. Next step here would be to prepare and distribute testing materials. So at your non-publics, you as the non-public school test coordinator are responsible for ensuring that test administrators and proctors know how to properly prepare and distribute testing materials. Some testing materials are intended for all students, while others are only provided for students with specific accommodations. If a student is provided with an accommodated material they are not eligible to receive, or vice versa, they do not receive a material that is required based on their IEP 504 EL plan, the test may be invalidated and require readministration. Because of this, we ask that you take every precaution to avoid accommodation errors and challenges for students. When we have to invalidate a test and readminister to students, that's a time issue for not only the students have to resit for a test, but also the adults. So we want to make sure that accommodations are administered correctly the first time so that we don't have these issues in the future. Secure materials, so testing materials, testing booklets, answer documents must be kept secure prior to distribution. So from the time they get to your schools to the time it's time to test, they should be locked away. When test administrators receive secure materials from test coordinators, they must sign a chain of custody form. It will be signed by you, the non-public coordinator, and by the test administrator or the proctor, whoever's picking up those materials. The form would then be signed again when the documents are returned and accounted for. Excuse me. When materials are destroyed, the test coordinators, you would need a witness to view the shredding of those materials, and then you would sign that into the chain of custody form. Those completed forms need to be kept in your file. We do have a chain of custody form template that you can use that we hope is helpful, that you can download from our website. You're not required to use that document. You can use something else, but again, make sure that it has all the information that we require. So it's best if you just use what we provide. All right, so once materials have been distributed, this would be an example of a student's desk. There are some materials that are on this desk that are prohibited. In our other trainings, this would be a game, but because we can't talk to each other, I'm just going to give you the answers. There are a few things on here that should not ever be here. The first would be this phone and an unofficial reference sheet of any kind. This one is math, but there are other reference sheets that are unofficial that students should not receive. So, cell phones. Cell phones may not be used in the testing environment by students or test administrators. During administration of paper-based tests, no one who's in the classroom at any time can have a cell phone. During computer-based tests, you as the non-public test coordinator, so long as you are not also administering the test, and the technology coordinator can use a cell phone to call for technical support. If a student or student's devices are experiencing technical problems that prevent a student from normal continuation of testing, the test administrator can alert you as a non-public coordinator or the technology coordinator. Both of you, the technology coordinator and the school coordinator, can call out for support as needed. Technical issues or delays that would significantly impact administration would need to be reported to us eventually through an incident report so that we can authorize continued testing at a later time. we'll talk about that more. So the other thing that I pointed out in that picture are prohibited materials. There are some materials that are prohibited for both thinking about parking science and mathematics. So for English language arts, dictionaries and thesauruses are prohibited. The only caveat there is for students who are EL students. If they have an accommodation for a bilingual word-to-word dictionary without definitions, those are allowable in some cases, but for most cases, dictionaries are prohibited. If there are any unauthorized resources or references that would explain or illustrate terminology or concepts, those are not allowed. Students are not allowed to have those during testing. For mathematics and science, if there are formula or conversion tables other than what's provided by the vendor, that is not allowed during testing. Any reference sheets that are not provided by the vendor, so that was the example that I showed before. Any other resources that define or explain terminologies, and then non-authorized and unauthorized calculators are also prohibited. So here's the picture again. As we see, we've made some corrections. We got rid of the cell phone. This is an official math reference sheet. There's a dictionary, headphones, and a calculator. Some of these things are sometimes allowable, but not always. So we'll talk about calculators here in a second. So calculators, grade level appropriate calculators will be available in the platform on the calculator sections of math units on the computer-based tests. In the instances where you as the school would like students to have handheld calculators, that is allowable as well during the calculator sections. But if the students are on a non-calculator section, of course they cannot have calculators unless they have an accommodation for such. In the test administration manuals, it will list out which of the sections are calculator or non, so your test administrators will know which sections students are allowed to have calculators unless they have an accommodation, of course. If you're allowing students to have handheld calculators, the test administrator must confirm that the calculator's memories have been cleared before testing. There's a list here of some prohibited calculating devices, so keep that in mind when you're thinking about whether or not to allow students to have handheld calculators during those calculator sections. Things to think about for accommodation. So as we mentioned before, it is a violation of a student's rights and test security for students to not receive their appropriate accommodations or for them to receive accommodations that they should not. Students should be familiar and comfortable with all necessary accommodations before the assessment begins. Ways to do that is through practice tests, or you can go through tutorials. That would be useful. If there are unique or non-standard accommodations that are not included in the manual that you would like to have for your students, you would need to contact us here at OSSE, so our colleague Michael Craig, to make sure that that is allowable and to get an approval before testing begins. In the instance where an emergency happens and a student needs a new accommodation that may not be listed on their 504 IEP or EL plan, you can apply for that. There is a temporary accommodations form available online that you can access in order to get that during testing. Lastly, there are unique accommodations. So each statewide assessment may permit unique accommodations. Those would also require advance approval from OSSE. We have a unique accommodation request form online. You can follow this link. You can also go to our test security website that has this information as well. You would submit this form to us. We would review it and let you know if that accommodation is allowable. A note, if we do allow a unique accommodation and the student is bringing whatever that is from home or from wherever, it must be given to you as a non-public coordinator or the test administrator prior to testing to ensure that the tools are appropriate, like what we agreed upon. There's no pre-stored information on or in them. All right, so these are examples of for a math test, desk that looks good. Everything here is allowable, and the students are ready to test. Here's another example of an ELA assessment that looks good. Reminders here. As the non-public school coordinator, you are responsible for ensuring that the test administrator and proctors know how to prepare and distribute the materials for each of their testing rooms. All applicable authorized personnel should review the test administrator manuals for further instructions prior to testing. For access materials, things about materials specifically. So all paper-based materials should be stored in that secure location prior to testing. Test coordinators should provide test administrators with the following. They should have the test administrator script, the test administrator manual, testing tickets, is what students use to log in, the test roster, and writing test booklets. For MSAA student materials are all available online. Test administrators will have the testing ticket, the DTA, and the assessment manual with them during testing. For DLM, administrators will receive the testlet information page, will retrieve the testlet information page, the TIP, for their first testlet. So testlets are units for DLM. Gather those materials before the beginning of the assessment using this path here. They will also need to retrieve the student's username and password from the educator portal. There's a credentials icon in the instruction and assessment planner that they would need to click to retrieve them. They are also located in the test management section of the educator portal, and this is the path to get there. For PARC, during PARC ELA, all students should be provided with headphones, as some ELA units include text with audio or video content. Headphones are not needed for PARC Math or DC Science unless students have accommodations or accessibility features that require them. Test administrators should be aware of all accommodations and accessibility features provided to students in their testing groups. Training for how to administer the accommodations or accessibility features should be provided in advance, and students should already be familiar with any tools or resources they will be using. All right, now it's time to administer the statewide tests to students. Reminder here, all authorized personnel are required to maintain the security and integrity of all testing materials, locations, and content during testing. Any deviations, breaches, or incidents must be reported to OSSE as soon as they are discovered. All right, so administering statewide assessments to the students. The following directives must be completed by all authorized personnel during test administration for all statewide assessments. Test administrators and proctors should follow all test security and administration guidance to securely administer the assessments to students. All authorized personnel should refrain from committing prohibited actions during test administration, and in instances where there are exceptional or special circumstances during test administration, the non-public school coordinator must make a plan with OSSE and ensure administration can continue in those instances. All right, so first thing that we mentioned was prohibiting from not committing prohibitive actions. So under the Test and Integrity Act, there are 3 groupings of prohibitive actions under test fraud, cheating, and test tampering. So in any of these instances, failure to comply with these prohibitions is a violation of test security. So the first grouping here would be test fraud and coaching. So there are a few things that are considered. Test fraud and coaching under the law. The first would be reviewing, reading, or looking at test items, student responses before, during, and after administering of the test, unless it's required to submit unless it's required for an accommodation or it's something required in the manual. So authorized personnel, anyone, but specifically the test administrator and the proctor should not be interacting with the content on the assessment at all. You should not be looking or reviewing content, student responses. We should not be looking at scratch paper, the monitors for students while they're testing. Any of that would be considered reviewing content. Another thing would be educator coaching, which would be assisting students in any way with answers to test questions by using verbal or nonverbal cues. Some examples of what that would look like would be answering. So if a student asks for help during the test and the test administrator or proctor gives them an answer, if they're interacting with student responses, including the scratch paper, providing verbal and nonverbal cues, saying things like good job or check your work or try again, shaking of the head, nodding of the head, thumbs up, any of those things that a student may potentially interpret as assistance during testing is something that should not be happening during administration. Other forms of prohibitive actions would be cheating. These are more obvious things that we would think about. So giving students answers, allowing students to view the questions before or after testing time, allowing students to use aids or references or books or manuals, things that are not provided by the vendor or not distributed by you all as the school coordinators, allowing students to use electronics or cell phones during administration. All of those things would be considered cheating and are prohibitive actions. The last grouping of prohibitive actions are around test tampering. So if the test administrator, the proctor, or you as the school coordinator are altering test students' responses, photocopying or reproducing secure materials, so questions or answers or scratch paper, if the test administrator or the proctor is altering the test procedures in some type of way, not following what's in the test administration manuals, that will be considered tampering with the process. If anyone has possession of test materials when they're not supposed to have them, so if a test administrator or proctor gets their materials ahead of time or doesn't return them when they're supposed to, these are all things that are prohibitive actions. Other forms of test tampering would be leaving secure materials in a non-secure location or unattended for any reason, making false certifications, handling materials for someone's own family member. So as I mentioned before, you can have proctors to participate in training, but if you have in test administration, if you have parents who are participating, they cannot proctor their own students. That is considered test tampering. Not participating or not observing chain of custody, so not signing in materials, signing out materials, not keeping account of all of the test booklets and answer documents that are being distributed and returned, all of those things are considered test tampering. Some additional guidance here. So in addition to what is listed out as prohibitive actions in the Test and Integrity Act, the test administration manuals that you receive from the vendors will also specify things that can and cannot happen during testing. And test administrators are expected to follow those scripts verbatim as they are written in those manuals. Test administrators and proctors can provide support to students when logging in. So before testing has begun, if a student needs help, the test administrator and proctor can support. Once testing has begun, the test administrator and the proctor should not be interacting with those computers at all. At that point, if there are issues, they should be contacting you as the non-public coordinator or the technology coordinator. The technology coordinator is able to look at the screen, assess what the issue is, and assist the student. The test administrator and the proctor should not be looking at the screens because that would be a prohibitive action, as I said before, because the test administrator should not be interacting with the screens. There are a few exceptions on those prohibitive actions as they're listed. It would not be considered a violation if the action needs to happen in order to provide an accommodation for a student in the IEP 504 EL plan, or if you're supporting a student to stay on task. I will note here that there are some examples on the ways that proctors and test administrators can interact with students. I would err on the side of caution on all of these ways that students are interacting with adults during testing, but these are allowable. Some exceptional circumstances that may happen or will happen during test administration that test administrators and you as a school test coordinator should be considering. So absences and makeup testing. Makeup testing, it should be included in your schedule when you're planning out when testing is going to happen within our window. So you should be scheduling those makeup testing. They can happen across grades and subjects in the same room, so long as the timing for that unit is the same. Students are not allowed to return to the testing session that they exited after starting. So this does not include if students are going to use the restroom. This is if a student has decided they're no longer going to take the assessment, take that unit, and they have exited out of the test purposefully, they are not able to return into that session. For students who are homebound, an exceptional circumstance there, the students are still required to participate, and you as the school coordinator would work with your LEA to come up with a plan and let OSSE know what that plan is. The same thing for testing in alternate sites. Same thing for homeschool students. Homeschool students must participate. This will likely not be something that's happening at the non-public, but in the instance that you do have homeschool students, you would devise a plan with the LEA and let us know. If you have students who have significant medical emergencies, such that they would not be able to complete the assessment at any time during your school's testing window, you can apply for a medical exemption. There is a physician's note that has to be included with that, but we do have a medical exemption form that you can find on our website with the rest of our test security documents. The last exceptional circumstance here would be for weather, natural disaster, fire alarms, school-wide emergencies. We do ask that you do whatever it is that you need to do to secure yourselves and your students, but then you submit an incident report afterwards to let us know what happened so that we have record of it on our end. This is something that we tell our LEAs. For non-publics, the LEA must ensure that all of their students, including those in non-publics, participate. You at the non-public are responsible for knowing all of this information that I've talked about in this training, but ultimately the LEAs are also responsible for making sure that their students do receive testing at each of your schools. For makeup testing, every effort should be made to ensure that all students complete each unit and testlet of each assessment. The makeup window should be included in the testing schedule to accommodate students who were absent. Makeup testing should be handled with the same level of security and care as all other testing sessions. So that means removing any prohibitive wall coverings or test taking strategies. You should still be using the chain of custody form, accounting for secure materials, shredding scratch paper. All of the considerations that you take during regular administration should also happen in makeup testing. So test administration manuals should be provided to all of the test administrators prior to testing. They are required to follow these manuals verbatim, so they should have them with them during testing. So things to consider specifically when administering access. It is important to give kindergarten students taking the access assessment some mild positive reinforcement on the assessment. You can refer to the test administrator script for acceptable positive phrases such as good job and very good. Please note that these types of things are only allowed for access for L's in kindergarten. In any other instance, saying good job and very good during test administration would be considered educator coaching and is a prohibited action. NSAA is administered to individual students by the test administrator. The DCA provides scripts and instructions and should be used throughout testing process. For DLM, it is administered to individual students by the test administrator. Begin by assessing students on their first testlet. Each remaining testlet becomes available. As it becomes available, you retrieve the tip, gather materials, and assess the student. Use the test progress column in the educator portal on the test management screen to confirm that all testlets are complete. Test administrators should be familiar with testing policies and scripts within Park and DC Science test administration manuals prior to testing. At the beginning of testing, test administrators must read those scripts verbatim. As I mentioned before, not following those scripts is considered test tampering under the law, so it is very important for test administrators to read the scripts and follow instructions as they are written in these manuals. If there are technical issues, the test coordinator or the tech coordinator should be interacting with those monitors. The test administrators or proctors should not view student content on the testing screen or troubleshoot. Once testing has begun, the test administrators and proctors should not be interacting. Students should practice using the TestNav tool during the practice test prior to the first day of testing. Test administrators cannot explain how to use tools in TestNav once testing has begun, unless the directive is written explicitly in the script. Once students begin to take the test independently, test administrators and proctors should be circulating the room, if there's room to do so, to monitor testing. They should not be viewing student screens or engaging in content, looking at scratch paper, any of that. They should just be walking in the room. Conversations between authorized personnel, so the adults and students during testing, should only occur when they are essential and when it is brief. Next step would be to monitor and support staff. When technical support is needed, test coordinators should be contacting the assessment vendor. Each vendor has a support hotline that is available during testing. If you have urgent incidents or policy questions, you can also contact us using our hotline here at this number. There is a printed version of all of these hotlines available on the test coordinator's research. It is also in the bit.ly that you can access at any time. As the school test coordinator, you're responsible for supporting your staff during testing. Ensure that your staff know how to reach you if they need support during testing. As I mentioned before, cell phones are not allowed to be used by test administrators, proctors, or students. So you need to have a plan in place for test administrators to get into contact with you, not using a cell phone during testing. As I said before, we do monitor some non-publics. So here at OSSE and at the LEA, they are responsible for monitoring test security at each of their schools, including some non-publics. Our monitoring visits are conducted by staff here at OSSE, and they are unannounced and could be happening anytime during testing. We do follow a checklist when we come to visit. We will post our updated versions of these checklists on our website where all of our other test security documents are. You can access this checklist if you'd like to see exactly what we're looking at and be prepared if we do come to your school. If we do have auditors or monitors coming to your school, keep in mind that they cannot provide feedback or technical assistance. They are there just to observe. They will come in and ask for documents. So if monitors do come to your school and request your test security file, please give it to them and allow them to move freely during the testing environment once testing has begun. Okay. The next step will be to submit incident reports to OSSE. There are many incidents, deviations, or issues that may occur during test administration that should be promptly communicated to OSSE. There are 3 different ways you can communicate with us. The first way would be in your school test security plan. That would be for minor deviations. So minor deviations would be things that would be changing from your test plan. So if there's a change in authorized personnel, if you have timing changes or changes in like the days that you're testing because something has come up, or if there are changes to any of the responses. So let's say in your test plan, you said that you're testing your secure location where your materials are locked up is in room 101, but for some reason you have to change that to room 103. That will be a minor deviation to your school test security plan, and you would put that in that section 13 section that we talked about in your test security plan. There's also places for you to update your testing schedule, so you can re-upload new schedules as they change, and you would do that in your test security plan, and that's all you would need to do. There are other ways that you communicate indirectly with us would be putting information in your school test security file. So that's not something that you would send to us. That's just things that you will put in your file that would potentially be helpful if we ever have to come for an investigation or we need additional information from you. So those would be things that are test administration concerns but aren't breaches in security. We'll talk about what that means in just a second. The last way that you would communicate with us directly would be to submit an incident report via the online website or the hotline for you all. That would be any breaches of security or integrity during administration, or if there was an accommodation issue. Here's a list of different types of scenarios. So instances where you would document it to us via an incident report: if a student becomes ill or injured and cannot complete testing that they've already started. So if they started a unit, got sick, had to leave the room, and was not able to come back to finish, that would be a time that you would submit an incident report to us, because we would need to take an action. If a student or staff member is in possession of a cell phone or a watch or a smartwatch or something that's unauthorized during testing, that is a breach of security that would need to be submitted to OSSE. If student or staff are taking action that would constitute cheating or educator coaching, of course that's a breach in security, you should submit an incident report. If students and staff are in possession of materials, so those unauthorized materials that we talked about, that would need to be submitted an incident report. If secure test materials are lost, so if you're missing testing tickets or missing used scratch paper, those things are considered breaches of security and would need to be submitted to OSSE. Students who don't receive their accommodations, that would be an instance where OSSE would need to take an action. So we need to get that information via incident report. I mentioned earlier, if there's an emergency or something happening at your school that required you to stop testing, all of that would be in an incident report. And lastly, if there are technical issues that cause students to not be able to complete their tests before the end of the school day, that would be submitted to OSSE. So if students have begun testing and there's a network issue or there's an issue with the individual student's tests and they're not able to finish, that will require OSSE to take an action, and therefore you would need to submit an incident report. There are other things that you would want to communicate to us, but it would be indirectly and not via an incident report. So that would be technical issues that cause minor delays. So let's say a network issue happened at your non-public but students were able to resume testing after like 3 minutes of a restart. That's something you would just put in your test security file because it's something that was out of the ordinary, but it wasn't an issue because students were able to finish. Assigning students with a different device, so if their device is broken or there's an issue and they need to switch out, that's not something you need to submit in an incident report, but it is something you should document in your file just in case. If there's student behavioral issues that are not disrupting the entire session or not allowing students to complete their own tests, that's something you would put in your file. And then if you're substituting your schedule, your test administrator or proctors, those are all things that you would update in your school test plan as a minor deviation. How do you submit this information? So for LEAs, they would submit using our online support tool. It's another quick-based application, but that's not something that you need to worry about. We do have an online incident reporting form. There's a link here. It's also linked on our website where all of our other test security documents are. You can click on that form, fill out all the information, submit it. It'll come directly to us. We'll be able to communicate. Just make sure that you put your contact information somewhere on the form so that we can communicate back to you. If there is an emergency, you can also call us on our hotline, and that is our number there. Other changes that you're making in your school test plan, as I mentioned before, those minor deviations are in section 13 of the school test plan. You can enter in that information as many times as there are changes. It just saves as a log. If you do submit an incident report to us, we may ask you for additional information. So there's 2 documents that we may require. So if you submit an incident report for something that that's a repeated issue, we may ask you to complete a plan to improve document. That document will just ask you for your plan on correcting that issue because we've seen that it's happened multiple times. We may also ask you for a fact-finding inquiry document. So this is something, if you provide us with an incident report and we need additional information from you, we'll request this form. Both of these forms are located in section 13 of the school test plan. When we communicate with you, we'll also attach a copy of these documents as well. If we do request either of these from you, we do ask that you complete them within 24 hours. Most of the time when we're requesting these documents, it's because we need additional information before we can take an action. We want to make sure that we are not halting students' tests unnecessarily. So if we get a quick response from you, we can then make a quick decision and not prolong the delay in testing. Reminder here, incident reports must be submitted as soon as they're discovered. It's essential that OSSE has time to mitigate any of those issues that arise as soon as possible. As I said before, our ultimate goal is to make sure that students are not delayed testing as much as possible. So the next thing on the timeline would be to collect test materials. So test administrators must follow closeout protocol detailed in the assessment manual for each test. Scripted closeout instructions may be required depending on what's in the test administration manual. For all tests, except for, remember, Access Kindergarten, TAs, test administrators, are not permitted to ask students or tell them to check their work. Instead, test administrators may say, "Are you finished and ready to close out your test?" After the student has exited the test administrator must collect all the testing materials and keep them in their possession until materials are returned back to you at the secure storage location. After the collection of those materials, the test administrators may dismiss students if that's what works for your school, or students may sit quietly and read books or complete activities that are not related to the assessed subject. Test administrators must ensure that all secure materials are collected and in their possession prior to the student receiving any other materials or beginning any other activities. All right, so that is all for test administration, there are some steps for assessment closeout. So the first step in assessment closeout would be to return/shred secure testing materials. So test administrators must return all testing materials to the secure storage location as soon as testing is over and sign those materials back in using the chain of custody form. You as the non-public coordinator are responsible for securely storing those secure materials as soon as they are returned back to you. You are also responsible, you should be reviewing that coordinator manual for each of those assessments to determine which of the materials need to be shredded and which of them need to be returned to the vendor. All secure materials that will not be returned to the testing vendor following test administration should be securely shredded with that witness present. There's a space on our chain of custody form that asks for your information and the witness, so keep that in mind. Thinking about access specifically, when returning test booklets to WIDA, the vendor, any booklet that contains student response information must have either a pre-ID label or the district/school label with bubbled student information. Test coordinator should refer to the test administration manual for details on returning materials. At the end of MSAA testing, test coordinator should destroy secure MSAA materials. All printed materials should be collected and securely shredded. Collect and destroy username information and password information, tip pages, and related materials. For Park and DC Science, secure and scorable materials will need to be returned to Pearson at the end of testing. Each item that must be returned will include a secure material label. Shipments from Pearson will include those labels when they send them to you initially, and packaging for returning secure materials. Keep those materials until the end of testing. It is a requirement that any of those secure and storable materials be sent back to Pearson within 5 days at the end of testing at that school. You would need to contact UPS and schedule a pickup for those materials. If any additional details about returning materials can be found in the test coordinator manuals for DC Science and Park. Next step would be to close testing on the online platform. So some testing platforms require closeout actions at the end of student sessions or at the end of the testing window. Ensure that all of those steps in the testing manual are followed for the online closeout process. For access coordinators must complete the data validation process. Now, if you're communicating with OSSEs, for OSSE's data validation process, that's not the same. This is specifically for WIDA AMS. So that process has to be completed in WIDA AMS at the end of testing. Tutorials on the data validation process and after testing activities are available on the system. For MSAA, test administrators should ensure that all tests have been submitted and or closed by the school test monitor in the MSAA platform. They should also complete the accommodations after test tab in the testing platform at the end of the survey. DLM, once the final unit of testing is complete, there are no additional actions that need to be taken for closeout. When a Parker DC Science test session is complete, the session should be stopped. That's a status in Pearson Access Next. This action will close that session for all students. All efforts should be made to complete makeup testing. If a student has an incomplete unit and was unable to complete testing during the makeup window, the student's unit can be marked complete and the session will be closed after that last day of testing at the school. The next step would be to finalize the school test security file. At your school, you must ensure that all of the required information in the school test security file is updated after test administration. Every school is required to keep that updated file in hard copy for 4 years. A reminder here, every school must keep that updated version of the file for 4 years. As I said before, we may come in for monitoring to review it, or we may come in for a post-test investigation, and we would need that information or should have access to it for up to 4 years. Next step would be to submit that test security affidavit to OSSE, or in your case to the LEA. Within 10 days after the conclusion of each of your school's testing windows, you need to sign the affidavit. So the affidavit is something that's included in your bit.ly. It's also on our website. It's a document that just certifies that, to your knowledge, you followed all of the rules. You would write down any issues that occurred and then sign it. After you sign it, you would submit that via email to your LEA coordinator for each of your LEAs. So you just sign duplicates and send it to each of the LEAs. At that point, the LEA would submit that information to OSSE using the OSSE support tool. That was why at the very first step, I asked if you don't know who your LEA test coordinators are for each of your assessments to reach out to me so that I can give you their contact information, because your next step would be to, at the very end, sign your document and give it to these individuals. And they know to expect these affidavits from you, so they may reach out to you as well towards the end of these windows. The reminder here, the LEA knows that they have to submit affidavits for both the LEA and the school level for every assessment. All right, so the next bit of things, or things that happen way after testing is over. Most of the things you don't need to worry about, but here are the last 5 bullets on our timeline. So the LEA would be responsible for completing data validation here at OSSE. That's not a step that you all will need to take, but the LEA may reach out to you if they have a question about a student's demographic information, about a student's testing information during the data validation process. That usually happens around June. During the summer, we calculate results and get those out to LEAs. They receive embargo data in the middle of the summer with preliminary results for students, results for each of these assessments. Then later in the summer, we do a public release of all of the test results. And it's usually done by the mayor, and it's online, and et cetera. And then right after that, ISR, so those individual student reports are sent to schools. So if you have students who are who took the test at your school this year, later in the summer, so usually in August, you'll start to receive packages from a printer that has students' ISR. So any student who took the test at your school, you'll receive those student reports in a box, and they'll be shipped to you and not to the LEA. And then the last step in the process would be to share those ISRs with families. They're also available online, so LEAs also have access to this information, but you also will, because you will receive those boxes. And that is the end of our training. We are out a little bit early, so I have been scrolling through the questions. If I did not answer your question, please just send me an email, and I will respond that way. Our goal here, of course, is to always make sure that we deliver uniform and equitable assessment. So all of those rules and requirements, the ultimate goal is to make sure that when students are doing these assessments, we're able to actually see what they're doing, and there's not any of these other interferences. And then all of our resources are here. They're also on our website. You have access to all of these links in the PDF. And then we close out with our contact information here. Thank you so much for joining me today. and sitting through this 2.5 to 3 hour training. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or any of my teammates. Thank you for the work that you do, and look forward to speaking with you all this season.